listening to Sasquatch Syndicate.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard.
And all the ape believers don't want any of the paranormal believers to say anything because they're all whacked and screwed up and we don't want them. And all the paranormal believers don't want to go to the ape believers saying, well, you're all closed-minded. You're not open to the fact that it does this and it does that.
And I look over my left shoulder and this creature is running through the woods and it's bulldozing the brush down. And I knew, man, this thing is going to get me.
Welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate. I'm your host, Chuck, out in Seattle, Washington, along with Paul in Portland, Oregon. Thanks to everyone for listening and those following us at SasquatchSyndicate.com and on our social media outlets. For those participating in the Sasquatch Syndicate monthly t-shirt giveaway, this month's winner was Bill Whipkey from Amsterdam, Ohio. So Bill, congratulations, thanks for listening to the show, and please check your Facebook for winner notification. Happy August, everyone. We hope you're enjoying your summer and able to avoid the heat. The team has been working feverishly getting ready for the International Bigfoot Conference out in Kennewick, Washington. Again, you can get your tickets at internationalbigfootconference.com. It's going to be a great event there in Kennewick, so we hope you can make it out to Washington. Also, just a quick note, we're replacing last month's Shane Corson interview with Ron Moorhead. Unfortunately, due to audio issues with Shane and the team's connections, we had to pull that episode down, but we're going to get Shane back on the show. We're going to get him queued back up this coming year, and we'll have some better updates. So, again, our apologies, but sometimes those things happen. Also, I know many of you have entered the Sasquatch Syndicate monthly t-shirt giveaway. Just a reminder, to enter the drawing, you need to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And to get to our YouTube channel, you can go to SasquatchSyndicate.com and click YouTube, or you can just simply put in the web address, youtube.com/Sasquatch Syndicate Podcast. So if you're out on YouTube and you're not at youtube.com/Sasquatch Syndicate Podcast, unfortunately, there are many pirates out there on YouTube attempting to make a buck on our team's work and, of course, impersonating the show. So while frustrating, I did want you to know that we are taking action and that will be cleaned up on YouTube in the coming months. And, of course, if you're out there, if you're trying to borrow anything from our show, just remember Sasquatch Syndicate's logos and content is trademarked and copyrighted. You can find our terms of use at SasquatchSyndicate.com. So on to this month's show. With us tonight, we're joined by forensic geologist Scott Wolter. Scott has been hot on the trail of America's mysteries for many years, and back in 2015, even did a show on Bigfoot. So Scott, welcome to Sasquatch Syndicate, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your background for our listeners and really how you got into solving America's unsolved mysteries.
Well, when I look back, 58 years old now, and I look back on this experience I've had for the last 30, 40 years, it's been really, really interesting. I went to college on a football scholarship and played linebacker for 4 years and won a couple championships and had a lot of fun with that. But when I was in school, I had a professor who inspired me to study geology. And to me, it made sense. It was very logical. Everything could be explained, and, it was neat to be able to look out at a hillside or at a mountain range or anything out in nature and to be able to understand how it formed. And it just all made sense to me. And I guess that's the way my mind works. I'm good at solving puzzles or figuring things out. And so I graduated in '82 with a degree in earth science and geology. And then I went to work as a field geologist with a gold company called Mapco Minerals. And basically I'd walk the woods all day long and I would map outcrops. I would take basal peat samples for Mapco, and we were in northern Minnesota up in the swamp country up there looking for gold, and found quite a bit of it. The only problem is that it's in dense rock. It's in hard to get to places, and the bottom line is, can we get it out and sell it at a profit? and that can be difficult. Anyway, I did that for a few months, and then I took a trip. My dad was a pilot for Northwest Airlines, and I was graduating, so he said, you get one more trip, make it a good one. And I said, I want to go to Australia and dive the Great Barrier Reef, and I want to go with you, Dad. So so we did this trip, and we went over to Japan and China and Hawaii, and we were going to be gone for a month. And we got to Australia and got on the Great Barrier Reef, and he drowned.
Oh my gosh, that's awful.
Just a horrible thing. But anyway, I came back home, and I had to leave my job. I was supposed to go out to Nevada, and I just couldn't go. I had to stay and help my family and my brother and my sister. So I stayed, and I floundered around for a couple of years, and then finally got back into geology, working for a testing lab in St. Paul. And I did that for 4.5 years, and they actually started me off as a field geologist again, going to construction sites, making sure the soils are ready for concrete, or checking the bottom of caissons or whatever. And then they moved me into this budding field called petrography, or the microscopic analysis of concrete and rock from a forensic standpoint. And it really was a new field. And I was pretty good on the microscope, and I think they thought I could maybe help with sales. And anyway, it worked out really well. And then about 4.5 years later, principals left, and they recruited me to come over and help them start a new company, actually 2 companies, American Engineering and Testing and American Petrographic Services, which is the company that I started back in 1990 and still have today. So we've been doing that for now 27 years. And like I said, mostly what we do in the forensic field is essentially autopsies on concrete and rock. And anything from low strength to cracking problems to delamination, scaling, fire damage. Probably one of the projects that's most notable that we worked on is we did all the forensic work at the Pentagon after 9/11, all the fire damage concrete from the jet fuel fire.
So Scott, out there for the conspiracy theorists, what's your thought? You were there. Was it an aircraft?
Yes, it was a 767 that crashed into the building. It wasn't a missile or a bomb like some people have speculated. But anyway, everything was going fine with that business, and minding my own business until July of 2000, when the Kensington Runestone came into the lab, and they asked me to do a forensic analysis on the inscription to try to tell them how old the inscription was. Obviously, the stone is old, but how old was the inscription?
Yeah, and just real quick for our listeners, the Kensington Runestone was discovered, I think, around 1898, but a Minnesota farmer unearthed this stone while he was felling trees, and it started a whole storm of controversy on its authenticity. Scott was one of the people that really provoked the whole thing with his study, so maybe just talk a little bit about that, Scott.
I ended up creating a study really from scratch, where I studied the decomposition of lake minerals on the runestone inscription and tombstones dating back to the Revolutionary War era, and I was able to conclude that the weathering was older than 200 years from the date it was pulled out of the ground, which makes the possibility of it being a late 19th century hoax impossible. So therefore, I said it had to be genuine. You really only have 2 possibilities, right? It's a hoax or it's not. And the age of the weathering really eliminated the fact it could be a hoax. So I said it was real, and that's when, oh my God, all the skeptics came out, the criticism, the attacks. And what was interesting, it was from people that were outside of geology. The geologists basically agreed with me, but it was historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, runologists, people that were in the humanities disciplines that obviously didn't understand the work or didn't want to accept the work. Well, I didn't take too kindly to this. I don't mind if somebody disagrees with our findings, but tell me why. But they couldn't articulate it. They just said, well, it's a fake, don't you know? And I said, didn't you hear what I said? Here's the evidence. What part of this don't you understand? I'll help you. And, well, that started it, and really that's what began this now 17-year long venture into the runestone that has ventured off into all kinds of other areas. And I've been able to develop really a new science of trying to date the age of carvings, inscriptions, petroglyphs in stone that are man-made, and the science is called archaeopetrography, and it's led to all these opportunities on television, and we're having a great time. So that's the story.
So Scott, did you parlay that and then, of course, promote yourself into the productions, or did the networks just come out and find you?
Well, the way it really started is, you know, I was a Lake Superior agate collector for a long time, and I've done a lot of radio or television interviews, and I've been on a couple of shows as a guest, and it just worked out because I was sort of the expert in Lake Superior agates. But, you know, nothing big. But when the runestone work came out in about 5 or 6 years into it, when I published my first book on the runestone with a co-author, Richard Nielsen, we had figured out a couple of really fascinating codes on the runestone. One was a dating code. The other one was a grail code. The word grail is encoded within the inscription. And a local television station did a news story about that, and they did a story about a murder case that we worked on, that we helped solve. And the woman who interviewed me, the reporter for WCCO television here locally, her husband and her were, in the process of starting their own production company called Committee Films. And when she came and interviewed me, she walked about the murder case. She looked at the poster in my office and saw the runestone, and she said, "Oh, have you studied the runestone?" And I said, "Yeah." Sit down. This is going to take a while. So we talked, and then she went home and told her husband, and he called me, and he said, "Hey, this would make a great documentary, and we should try to do a story on this." Well, that eventually became Holy Grail in America, and to my knowledge, that's the most successful documentary that History Channel's ever done. And they play it all the time. In fact, just last week I saw it again. I hadn't watched it for a few years, and it was pretty good. So that did well. And then we did another documentary called Who Really Discovered America, and then they approached me about doing a series, and that's how we got into the series.
So Scott, and for our listeners, and maybe a lot of them don't. So Scott, and for the listeners, I think that there's a few out there that don't know, but you and I have some common ground on our football careers. And as I played, so Scott, I don't know if so Scott, this is kind of interesting, and I don't know if our listeners were aware, but you and I have some common ground on our football careers. I played outside linebacker at the University of Kansas back in the 80s.
Oh, is that right? I was a linebacker too.
Yeah, and if I recall, weren't you on a legendary undefeated football team back there in Duluth, Minnesota growing up?
Wow, you did your homework. Very good. Yes, we won the conference my junior year. My senior year, we won all our games, and it was just a fantastic experience. And God, it's so long ago. We've had reunions and things, and it's just amazing how time flies. But I'll tell you this: when I was 37 years old, I played touch football for like 22 years. And one of the guys I played football with, who played at St. John's, got a job coaching one of the local minor league teams. And he comes up to me. He of course recruited guys from the touch league we were playing to come back and play tackle football. And he asked me if I would try out for the team. I was 37 years old. I go, "Todd, you're crazy. I can't play football anymore, tackle football anymore." He says, "Yes, you can." So I tried out. I made the team. I started, and we won a championship that year too. And ended up playing 4 years, and I retired when I was 40. So, and I can still walk and talk. I just played basketball. I came back from the club just now. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how success in team sports sometimes translates to success in life. And so, anyways, I just thought that was really fascinating.
I would totally agree with that because, as you know, being an ex-player, you really go through the gamut of emotions, not just during a game, but during a season, and especially, back in the 80s, training camp was like. I mean, it was mentally and physically grueling, and you just had to power through it, and it teaches you a lot, and you learn how to work with people, you learn how to handle success. Let's face it, you don't make a great play every time, right? The other guys are trying hard too, and every once in a while, they knock you on your rear, right? And so you have to just put it out of your head. You got to keep going, and I use football metaphors all the time, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think, whether you won championships or not, the lessons you learn, the relationships you develop, the experiences you have, learning how to get through difficult times is invaluable and absolutely helps you in life. And not just football. All sports teach you a lot of those important lessons.
So, Scott, I guess, as a forensic geologist, and certainly our listeners out there are really interested on how maybe you crossed over from a show about America's mysteries and geology into tracking Bigfoot. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and really what led you into the genre for your show?
Yeah. Well, I have to be honest with you guys. When I first started doing this show, I can remember I was talking to Andy and Maria, and I think we were having dinner and a couple beers, and I said, I just want you to know one thing. I'm not doing aliens, and I'm not doing Bigfoot. I said, that's not my stuff. I don't want to do that. And they said, no problem. So we never did anything on aliens, which, again, is just not my wheelhouse. I'm not saying there isn't aliens. I have no idea. And I'm not saying that there isn't Bigfoot or Sasquatch or some other human-like ape creature. I have no idea. I don't know. I just didn't feel like, my background lended itself to looking into that. But so when we got to season 3, I can remember Maria called me, and we were getting ready to sort of put the episode list together, and they always consulted me on everything, and we always came to an agreement and worked very well together. And she called me up and she said, would you reconsider doing something on Bigfoot? And I said, Maria, she said, you get to go to Nepal. I said, okay.
Yeah, I can imagine that turned the tails pretty quickly.
And no, I mean, well, in all seriousness, well, that is the way it happened. I mean, Nepal is amazing, and I for me, as a geologist, to be able to fly in a helicopter into the Himalaya mountains to see the tallest mountains in the world was one of the most profound, moving experiences of my life, and I'm not kidding.
So yeah, let's just talk about that. And certainly I know a lot of crews that went up there, but landing at the Tenzing Hillary Airport in Nepal is a pretty dangerous experience. And if you haven't seen it on maybe Scott's episode or Josh Gates or even Finding Bigfoot, go ahead and check that out. You can find it on YouTube. Just look up Tenzing Hillary Airport, and it's probably pretty thrilling. But maybe, Scott, just talk about that yourself and really what that experience was like.
Yeah, the airport, I can't remember the name of it. Is that the one that has the shortest?
Exactly.
It's like the most dangerous airport in the world.
Yeah, the Lukla Airport.
Yeah.
Cut in the side of a cliff, right?
Yeah, it's cut in, and it's angled up. I mean, it's up at like a 20, 25-degree angle to really slow the plane down as quickly as possible. You land actually going uphill. And we did go in and out of there, but like I say, it's as a geologist. I mean, I can say I've seen Mount Everest. How many people can say that? I mean, to me, that's it. That's literally the top of the mountain, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And what was amazing about that is when we were on our way out. In fact, we were at the airport. And we had just taken off in the helicopter back to Kathmandu when that accident happened on the mountain, when there was that shifting of the ice and 17 Sherpa were killed. we were on the mountain when that happened, and they weren't any of the Sherpa that were with us when we were there for the week or so that we were up there, but everybody that was with us knew all those guys, and it was really sad. And of course, everybody back home heard about it, and they thought, geez, are you guys okay? And of course we were, but it just goes to show you that even though, you're with, some of the best accommodations, you just never know when something can happen and a life can be snuffed out. And even though it was an awesome experience, it's really a dangerous place. And it was really one of the highlights of doing the show.
So, Scott, I know we have a lot of listeners out there that are explorers, and we don't always get the benefit of talking to someone that's traveled all the way to Nepal. So maybe we can just kind of live the journey through your eyes, and if you could just really take us through the trip from Minnesota to Nepal. And then I'd also like to talk about your journey up to the Pangboche Monastery, where you got to see the Yeti scalp.
Yeah, and I have to be honest with you, I don't exactly recall exactly the cities we went through, because for 3 years there, I mean, it was a whirlwind. We literally went all around the world, and I forget the routes, but I know that we went to, it may have been France. I can't remember, or maybe no, it wasn't through Portugal. It might have been through France. We flew from, from Minneapolis, or from Minneapolis to the East Coast, and then to, I think, France. And then we flew to, I think it was Kathmandu. We flew into a big airport there, and then we took a helicopter up to whatever the name of the airport is. I forget the name of the city. It's not a city, the name of the airport. There's nothing there, really. And then we took another helicopter up to, the town on the mountain where we stayed, and then we hiked from there about 6-7 miles up to the monastery. And the monastery was at about 14,000 feet, if I recall correctly. And it was a beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And what was fascinating for me is, as we walked into the city, this little city, it's not a city, it's a little town where the monastery was, there was like a causeway as you walk in, and in the middle there was like a berm, and it was just covered in flat slabs of stones with like inscriptions of Tibetan prayers. And they had been there for literally hundreds, some of them had been there for hundreds of years. So as I'm walking, I'm looking at these things, and I'm looking at the weathering, and I'm thinking, God, these are the most amazing control samples for looking at carved inscriptions I've ever seen in this type of environment. And, that always struck me. But when we went to the monastery, it was, they were very accommodating. The monks were great. And, you saw what happened. They let me look at at what they claimed was a Yeti skull, and they opened it up, and I got to take pictures, and I took some close-ups of the hair. And it's been so long since we did this, I forget all the details. But
yeah, this is really fascinating. I'm glad you're stopping on this.
I remember being inside the monastery, and it was it's interesting to sort of see other cultures and their religious beliefs and how they practice those beliefs, and the idols and the things that they use in their rituals. And it was a memorable experience, let me tell you. And the Yeti skull was obviously very sacred, very important to them, and reportedly had been there, my understanding is, for almost 4 centuries.
Yeah, what's interesting, too, is that, and I know that, you were one of the people that actually broke ground on that. You traveled to the Himalayas, and I remember you had went up to the monastery. As you said, you took pictures of the hair.
Yep,
I think you had compared whether or not it had been cut before.
Yep. You're
before
100%
what you had
right.
seen, what Doug Hychek had talked about. And but after you had done that, of course, Josh Gates from the Hunt for the Yeti has been there. Finding Bigfoot traveled over, but you really broke ground on that. So it was really
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was really interesting that you were one of the first people to go there, and it's just really fascinating that you made that journey.
Yeah, well, you know what? Yeah, as I think I told you guys a little bit earlier before we got going, you know, even though I was reticent about doing an episode on Bigfoot and Sasquatch, I'm really glad I did, and really, you know, I harp all the time. I say, well, you know, you got to be open-minded about my Templar stuff, and you know, about this and that and everything else, and really, you know, for this episode, the shoe was on the other foot, and you know, I ask people to be open-minded about my stuff, but it's fair for me to do the same. And it was pretty easy to talk myself into it, and that little going to Nepal thing certainly was the one that pushed me over. So, and I learned a lot. And I don't know where you guys want to go with this, but there is one thing that I would like, a little story I'd like to tell you about one of the guys that I interviewed. Actually, a couple people that I talked to. I don't know if you want to hear it or not, but I'll certainly be glad to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you know, and you know, again, I'll be honest, and I'll tell you that when I did this episode and I agreed to do it, I told the production company, and I said, look, I said, I'm going in a skeptic, okay? And unless I see a body, a skeleton, or shake Bigfoot's hand, I'm going out a skeptic, okay? Just want you to know, I need to see some compelling evidence. And they said, that's fine. If you're not convinced, you know, just draw the conclusion you feel is appropriate. And I said, believe me, I will. That's what I do. And so I didn't know what to expect when we got into it. Obviously, the Nepal thing was a great experience. But one of the first people that I talked to, and I don't recall his name.
Yeah, I think it was Ed Welch.
He reminded me of Billy Jack. I don't know if you guys remember the movie Billy Jack. Tom Laughlin was the actor. But the guy reminded me of Billy Jack. And he was really a very nice guy, very sincere. And I remember I talked to him. And, you know, I interviewed him, and I said, tell me about your experience. And one thing that I came away with when I was done, again, I went in a skeptic, and I really didn't know what to expect from this guy. But when I was done, I can say with 100% certainty that I believe that this guy believes he saw Bigfoot. There's no question in my mind that he believes he saw that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he did. He may have, but whatever it was that he saw, he believed it was Bigfoot. It was absolutely convincing to me. He believed with his heart and soul what he was telling me was the truth, and in his mind, it was the truth. So, and the other people I talked to were very convincing. Again, it doesn't prove anything, and some of the things he said I found to be pretty hard to believe, but he 100% believed it. And I think that's important to say. If I thought that he wasn't credible, I'd tell you. I'd say, well, I think he was, you know, he was giving me a line. I'd tell you, I don't believe that at all. I think he believed what he was telling me was the truth.
You know, Scott, for our listeners, what was it that he said to you that really resonated with you, that really got you?
Well, first of all, we went out to the park where he had this encounter, and we actually went to the spot where it happened, and we looked into the. I mean, it's a campground in the northern part of the Twin Cities. It's a beautiful area, but it is relatively remote. And I remember he was telling me that he you know, it was sort of later in the day. It wasn't dark yet, but it was sort of getting, you know, a little bit dark. And he said he looked across and he saw this human, and at first he thought it was a person, but then he realized it was much bigger than a person. And he didn't really get a clear look at it, but he said he saw it, you know, he knew what he was looking at. And, you know, he was looking out there, and I could just feel the emotion. I could feel it was coming back to him. He was, you know, kind of reliving it. And what he described to me was that I said, well, did it start running, and what happened? He said, no. He said it didn't run. He said it sort of glided. It's almost like it floated. sideways, like instead of running and, loping like you would imagine, he said it sort of just floated across the swamp. And I said, well, what happened then? He said, well, it just disappeared. I mean, like vanished, or it went in the trees, or what? He said, well, it just kind of went behind a tree and then it was gone. And it almost sounded like, well, the way I just described it almost sounded like some type of alien encounter, not like this big ape-like creature running through the woods and panting and making noise. It was something different. And that really struck me because I had never heard that before. And my question to you guys is, have you ever heard that kind of a description of a sighting before?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting is how you said that it glided or floated. We have talked to so many people that literally it made them think that Sasquatch is an alien. They said nothing could move like that. No, we've never seen anything move like that. So that's really interesting that you said that. And I also think it's really interesting that when that emotion is just palpable when you're speaking with that person.
Yeah.
How palpable that emotion is, and it just absolutely, you can literally feel the experience coming off them. But absolutely, we've heard that. I want to ask you, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. All I was going to say is that's exactly right. That's why, whenever somebody asks me about that episode, I always make sure that I say that, because that person absolutely saw something. What it was, I don't know, but he absolutely believes what he saw, and I believe he believes what he saw. I just don't know what he saw,
Now, when you said that he said it disappeared, now did it literally vanish before his eyes, or did it disappear behind a tree or a rock, or what did that exactly mean?
Well, the way he described it, I mean, if you could just imagine, and I'm looking out my living room window here, and we've got trees. We've got DNR property to the south of us, and it's like you see something moving, and then it gets behind a tree, and you're waiting for it to come out behind the other side of the tree, and it just doesn't. It just disappears. That's how he described it. It didn't just vanish in air. It was like it went behind a couple trees, and it should have come out, and it didn't. And it didn't stop. It just vanished.
It just
That's
vanished behind the tree.
Yep.
Well, it'd be great if you could tell our listeners about some of your research on giants. So, for example, Minnesota, the Appalachians. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've actually spent a lot of time with certain native tribes, and they pretty much all have oral stories about giants in the past and about little people as well. And there have been so many stories, and again, this is getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but it's kind of like Bigfoot. It's something that has been reported on. If natives say that it's real, then I give that a lot of credibility. And I have seen some pictures of what I think look to me to be good photos of what seem to be oversized bones and remains of humans. And so I'm open-minded to it. I have to be honest, to date, I have not seen anything that has moved the needle too much for me. But again, one of the guys we interviewed, Roger Saker, he said when he dug that trench and the bones of the big guy were sticking out, he said they were huge. And
when you say huge, how huge is huge? What is big?
I just haven't seen it, Pardon me?
When you say big, how big were those bones?
Well, he told me that he estimated about twice the size of a normal human tibia and fibula. What were sticking out, the feet sort of got knocked off, but the legs were still sticking out. And that's what he described them as, and he said there were two females that were in the fetal position on either side. And that's when he called, the police. The police came out, and if you're out there, at least in Minnesota, I don't know what it is in the rest of the country, if you find human remains, you have to call law enforcement. They come in, they treat it as a possible crime scene, and if they determine that the victim is over 100 years old, probably Native American, then they turn it over to the archaeologist. And then the archaeologist will do the assessment, and that's what happened here. And what was, and I'll be honest with you, there was something that really didn't go right on that episode. Unfortunately, many times we will film things out of sequence. And unfortunately, in that episode, we shouldn't have done that, because the scene where I told Roger that, you know, it wasn't a giant was before we filmed the interview with the state archaeologist. And between you and me, I don't think he was being truthful with me. He was, he and I have a history. He doesn't believe in the runestone. And I always say to him, I say, look, Scott, it's not about faith. The authenticity of the runestone is about evidence and facts. Okay, so it's irresponsible for you as a state archaeologist to tell people what you believe. If you don't know, you have to say, I don't know. I do it all the time. People get mad at me on America Unearthed when I say, well, you know, I can't say what the conclusion is, or if I give a conclusion that they don't like at the rock wall. And I say that they were mad at me for saying that it was natural when everybody wanted it to be man-made. And I said, time out. I said, nobody wants it to be man-made more than me. But it's not. And I'm not going to lie or make it up. And so anyway, you know, getting back to the giants, you know, Scott would say things to me like, this is the state archaeologist in Minnesota. He's retired now. He's no longer in that position. But he was trying to tell me, well, you know, a lot of times people mistake, you know, when a body decomposes and the connective tissue, you know, rots away. He said the bones tend to elongate or separate, so it looks taller than it is. And I looked at him like, what do you think, I'm an idiot? You think I don't understand that? I said, that's not what we're talking about here. And it kind of pissed me off, to be honest with you. He was being a little bit, I thought, pandering and condescending. And, you know, he just wasn't answering truthful. What he did do was show me the photographs that the anthropologist who actually examined human remains, and he showed me pictures of the two females in the fetal position. We didn't show it in the show, but I don't know, they just didn't feel it was appropriate, I guess. But I saw them, and I said, well, Scott, where's the pictures of the male? Well, I don't have those pictures with me. Well, Scott, that's the reason I'm here. I'm here to talk to you about, Roger says this is a giant. Where are the pictures? You're showing me the pictures of the females. Where's the other one? He didn't have it with him. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think that's BS. He knew exactly why I was there, and he didn't bring the photo. So what I should have said to Roger, instead of letting him down, is, hey, I didn't see any evidence that it wasn't a giant. I'm not saying it was, but I'm not convinced that it wasn't. That's what I should have said, and unfortunately, by filming it out of sequence, there's no way we could go back and do it again. So that was a mistake on our part.
Now, this legend, and I guess, you know, I guess there is some evidence of these giant bones that are found in things like Mima mounds and tribal burial grounds and such. Have you ever seen any of that? And certainly, you know, there's some folks out there that probably draw the correlation between giants and potentially
Right.
Sasquatch and Bigfoot and those things. Have you ever seen any evidence of that?
Unfortunately, I have not. But I, you know, and in the interest of full disclosure, that was never really a big area of interest for me. You know, there have been many things that have been, and I'll do everything I can or die trying to see them. And I've been very successful at, you know, seeing different artifacts that I really wanted to make an effort to see, and I just haven't made the effort to do that. However, I have seen many articles about giants, many articles about skeletons that used to be in museums, and then funny, when you inquire, they're no longer there, or they were sold, or they were taken to the Smithsonian, and you know, the Smithsonian's the biggest black hole in the world, so you're not going to get anything out of them. So I have to say, no, I unfortunately I have not seen anything, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. I think there's too many stories, too many newspaper articles. They can't all be wrong. There has to be something there.
So Scott, just thinking about Native American lore, and of course there's a lot of embellished or misinterpreted stories and legends in the tribes here in North America. In terms of, your own research and dealing with the tribes, what do you think of Native American legend, and how much credence can you lend to that as a researcher?
Yeah, going to just Native American lore and legends and myths, and certainly there's a lot of storytelling and embellishments across, the tribes of North America and the First Nation tribes up in Canada, and I think you explored some of those throughout your history along the way. What do you think of Native American legend, and really how much credence can you lend to that as a researcher?
Well, actually, I have a lot of experience with certain tribes, the Ojibwa, the Cherokee specifically. The Wampanoag out in the East Coast have been very accommodating and helpful. And really, every time I've gone to Native American tribes and different Native people that I've reached out to, look, they're like anyone else. You treat them like you want to be treated, show them respect their culture, and try listening. You'd be surprised. They're welcoming, warm, and if you earn their trust, they'll share some of their secrets. And I have no reason in the world not to believe what they say. I mean, some people think oral tradition is the telephone game, and I think that's insulting to say. I've talked to some of the story keepers and the prophecy keepers in various tribes. Many of them record their history in symbols that are tattooed on their bodies. And people don't understand that's how their history is recorded in some cases. And most of the prophecy keepers and story keepers are women. So could some of these stories be fictional or embellished? I don't think they're fictional. I think, most of these legends and myths that you hear, especially in Native cultures, are based in at least some fact, and I think you would be surprised if you were able to go back, you'd realize how much of it, in fact, is fact. So I put a lot of credence into it, and I think more people should. Just because, they record their history and it doesn't in a different way than we're used to doesn't mean it's not reliable. I think it's very reliable.
Now, in terms of just kind of getting into, the concrete and stone, I guess, that reliability and things you've seen in terms of legend and pictographs and petroglyphs and things depicting Bigfoot along your journey in stone, which you are an expert in, what can the geological evidence tell us in terms of, cliff dwellings and carvings and petroglyphs, et cetera?
Well, I think first and foremost, what many of these petroglyphs that appear to show images of what you guys would call a Bigfoot or Sasquatch, the first thing it tells you is that the natives take it seriously. That's the first thing. The second thing is, based on some of these petroglyphs, these legends and these beliefs are quite old. In fact, they're ancient. They've been around for a long time. So whatever the truth is, these people believe it, and they believed it for a long time, and they have passed it down as part of their culture and part of their history. I think those are two things you can take to the bank.
Chuck mentioned earlier MEMA mounds. Can you tell our listeners what exactly a MEMA mound is, and do you think there's any correlation between, these giants in Appalachia, Minnesota, and Sasquatch?
Well, there's a lot of these mounds. There's different kinds of mounds. There's burial mounds. There's ritual mounds. There's, there's pyramids. There's different types of structures. There's lodges that certain native tribes will build, and have their rituals in, and just like Freemasonry, they're very similar. But many of these older mounds that date back thousands of years have stone walls or stone structures inside them, and then they're covered with mounds. And in many of these, they have found interesting human remains in interesting positions, laid out in different orientations that suggest some type of ritual burial. And in many cases, people have reported finding large skeletons or giants. And, I think, I think you sort of alluded to this interesting question that I think we just touched on in the episode, and we really didn't have time to develop too much further, but could there be a connection between giants and Sasquatch, or what natives call giants? And I think there could be. And, the one thing that, on one hand, I would argue, if you look at the data, and you guys know this better than me, that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of reported sightings over the years of big creatures, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. But yet, I don't think we've seen one body yet. I don't think we've seen a skeleton. We haven't seen anything that we can absolutely say with 100% certainty this is Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. And so for me, that's a little bit of a disconnect. But on the other hand, how can this many people all be wrong? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the answer is. And I like to think that I can have an answer most of the time, but I don't know how to explain that. Maybe you guys can.
I think the common rebuttal from most in the Sasquatch community would be that, nature's very efficient. When creatures die in the wild, that they hide. And once they die, they decompose, and the scavengers take their course within 7 to 21 days. So you don't have a lot of time to discover the bones. And I know that on your episode Tracking Bigfoot, Doug Hychek had actually, brought up that there's 62,000 black bears in British Columbia, yet no one ever walks across black bear bones. But if I recall correctly, you were the guy that has.
That was me.
Yeah, so maybe just share that experience with our listeners, and for those that go out and watch the episode, you'll get a chuckle out of that.
Funny because, you remember I told you I was a field geologist with MAPCO Minerals right after I got out of college, and it was during those 3 months that I was working in northern Minnesota that happened. And the funny part was, when you're out in the woods and nature calls, you just take care of your business. And we were out in the middle of nowhere. I would be dropped off, and I would have a traverse through the woods and the swamps that was on average 7 to 8 miles, and then they would pick me up on the side of a road. I had to come out on the side of the road, and I'd sit there and wait to get picked up at the rendezvous time. And this day, I was out in the woods, and nature called, and I, being modest, of course, there's nobody around. I went underneath this evergreen tree, and it was the boughs are hanging down. It sort of created almost like a tent, kind of an enclosure. And I sort of got in there, and here was the skeleton of a bear, and there was this black fur laying in a circle around it, and it was just laying there. I mean, it looked like it had died, but it was a fully articulated skeleton, but the connective tissue was gone, and for some reason the bone was perfectly intact. And I picked up the skull and looked at it, and I could see where there was a bullet hole that had entered just above the eye. But if you can imagine a bear walking with its head down, its snout down, the bullet didn't go through the brain case. It went through the sinus cavity and out the bottom of the mouth and probably out the lower jaw. So it wasn't a fatal gunshot wound. At least it didn't kill it instantly. It killed it later. It must have bled to death or whatever. But so I kept it, and I put it in my bag, and I still have it. It's downstairs. When I give lectures to school kids or whatever, I bring that along, and that's probably the most interesting thing I have. They all think that's cool. But yeah, I fully articulated. I didn't have a camera with me, and I didn't. Even if I did, I probably didn't think to take a picture of it. But I do have the skeleton, so I'm that guy.
Yes, you are. And Doug Hychek's face was awesome on that episode. So, Doug, if you wrote that into the show, it was pretty awesome and kind of gave the show more credence, in my opinion. So, Scott, certainly Paul and I are not strangers to the outdoors. And a lot of times, wildlife does try to find a quiet place to, go find its final resting place. And, it just wants to be left alone, as many humans do as well. But I guess, if we were going to find additional fossil or bone evidence, it'll probably be in a remote place, like you did.
Well, and I think that there's got to be listeners out there that have had pets, and when they get to the end of their lives or they're terminally ill, they go to a quiet place and they just lay down and pass away. And I think that's a natural thing. I mean, you know what? I think humans in the past probably did the same thing. I think let's face it, when we're sick and things aren't going well, you want to be alone, right? Leave me alone. I want to pout by myself, and in a way it's kind of the same thing. I really don't think we're any different.
Scott, out of all of your research, what do you feel is the topic that has the most meat on it? Something that you feel like something's going to break?
Something's going to break?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe, well, geez, Scott, you're the guy that, explored it all. The Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, Montezuma's gold. I mean, you name it, you've been after it. So that being said, based on everything you've explored to date, what do you think has the most chance of breaking new ground and changing history?
Well, I can tell you that the thing that turns me on more than anything, and the thing that I know the most about, and the thing that is going to break with some big news very soon, is the work on pre-Columbian Templars in America, and how their story of being persecuted and put down, and but yet continuing on under the radar, and coming over here, starting in the 12th century, the latter part of the 12th century, and eventually establishing settlements here and assimilating with natives because they shared a similar ideology, and eventually passing on that ideology and that dream of establishing what they call the Free Templar State, where they didn't have to worry about persecution from monarchs, persecution from the Roman Catholic Church, where they could practice freedom of religion, freedom of speech, all the things that we enjoy here, that eventually became the United States of America. And what you're going to hear about is new evidence that sheds direct light on that story and fleshes out that story in details that you can't imagine, with events that people had no idea happened. And I've known all along what the general story was. I just didn't understand the details. I know the Kensington Runestone's part of that. I know the Newport Tower's part of that story. There are other artifacts that were left by these guys that, to me, point only to them. But, there are larger forces at work out there that don't want this story to come out. They don't want to admit that there were many cultures that came to North America prior to Columbus. That guy that didn't set foot on the continent that already had millions of people living here.
Yeah, and I wonder how much that history would change if it was proven that, Columbus was not first to discover America. So just curious, in your opinion, how much do you believe in the published historical account and records of Columbus discovering America? And what have you uncovered along the way?
It's total BS. I mean, it's just nonsense. But, like I said, there are larger forces at work here. There are political interests, there are business interests, there are religious interests that had a vested interest in the whole, folly and of manifest destiny. The first part was the dehumanizing of the Native Americans by calling them savages. I mean, it's the age-old technique of labeling a group of people to justify persecution. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, nobody ever uses the word, but what actually happened was genocide to the native cultures here, and in the interest of taking their land, and conveniently wiping away the witnesses who could testify to what actually happened prior to contact, right? The other part was, this is virgin land and it's ours for the taking. This God-given right that it's our right to take this land for our people, and as if we were better than everybody else. But that's how it works. That's what they do. And one of the big problems is they didn't want to have any evidence of other cultures being here prior to us. That would undermine manifest destiny. So they had to wash all that away, and whichever way they could do it, they did it. And I wouldn't be surprised if similar forces work against the idea of Sasquatch and giants. It's just, look, we don't want to go there. It's easier to say it's BS and make it go away than to seriously address it and take it head on. And, and that creates an uphill battle for me, for other people that are out there trying to do legitimate science. And of course, you got the trolls and the debunkers that are out there on the internet who attack our credibility, and these are people we don't even know. I mean, this is another technique. If you can't beat them with evidence, then attack their credibility and see if you can win the game that way. And it's despicable and it's dishonest, but my God, we're seeing more of it in the world today than ever. And fake news and all of this, it's like we're taking a step backwards, denying the science of things like global warming and CO2 and the destruction of land and our environment through our oil-based economy. I mean, we have other technologies we can use. We have technologies that produce virtually no waste. Why aren't we developing them? Because there's too many people making too much money. They don't want to change it, and it could be to our detriment, and it's something that needs to change, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, there's actually a great documentary. It's called We Are Planetary. You can find it actually on YouTube or iTunes, but definitely would recommend the listeners pull that down. But it kind of, talks about, the global economy and how it's really changed society, and at what cost. So, Scott, and just because I'm fascinated with back to who discovered America, but, you investigated the Egyptians, I even believe the Vikings. You've seen a lot. Who do you think was first? Who do you think came over here, and who do you think landed first on the shores?
Well, I guess there's two answers to that. One is what I think, to me, makes the most sense, and then the other is what Native Americans have said. Natives have told me that they went over there first. They came from here and went over to Europe before people from other continents came over here. And the people that told me this, I think are 100% credible. This is part of their history, part of their tradition that they were indoctrinated in and initiated into, and they absolutely believe it. I think it's fascinating. Why not? I mean, look, anybody who thinks they know the answer is full of it. We don't know the answer. And I think we can't make any progress until we're honest with ourselves and say, look, we don't know for sure what happened. We have a lot more work to do. There's a lot more evidence to be looked at. I mean, let me just, and I'll get back to my answer in a sec, but let me just give you one little thing to think about and why I can say with confidence that we don't know what the hell the answers are yet. If you think about the glaciers, when they were at their maximum extent, roughly 20,000 years ago, let's say, in the last glacial ice age maximum, sea level was at least 300 to 400 feet lower than it is now. And those early cultures that were human cultures that existed back then, both in North America, South America, all around the world, most cultures even today live along the oceans, the coastlines, and along waterways, right? So when you raise the sea level 300 to 400 feet, especially in places like down in Florida and in other places where you have continental shelf regions, can you imagine the ancient sites that are sitting underwater that have never been touched. Some people have estimated that greater than 95% of the human habitation sites dating back 5,000 plus years are all under 2 to 3 to 400 feet of water. So what kind of data is sitting down there that is waiting to be discovered? So just ponder that for a minute and realize we don't know anything, really. So getting back to who I think came here, stay with the glaciers for a second. When they melted back 10 to 12,000 years ago in the area where I live, in the Lake Superior region, you have the largest copper deposits, the most pure copper deposits, and silver and other metals, but copper for sure, found anywhere in the world, 99.9% pure copper. And it was just laying all over the place as glacial nuggets, some of them as big as automobiles. And of course, we have the in-place, copper that's still in the ground in fracture zones and shear zones and everything else that have been mined out over the years. But back in those days, the Native Americans just walked around and picked up copper like it was nothing. And a lot of it they couldn't pick up. And copper is very valuable. It back in the Bronze Age, some people say it was more valuable than gold and silver. And so good news gets around. And I believe that the Egyptians probably hired out the Carthaginians or Phoenicians, and they were master trade people. They were master sailors, shipbuilders, and they were hired out by different cultures. The Egyptians for sure, and they went anywhere they wanted to. They were master sailors, and if you understand navigation, you know how to read the stars. There's no reason why they couldn't get into the Great Lakes region. And copper was such a valuable commodity. I think they've been coming over here, and we did an episode on the copper culture for at least 6 to 8, probably 10,000 years, or even as the glaciers were melting back. And you got to remember, you had isostatic rebound. The weight of the ice actually pushed down on the crust. The lakes were larger, the rivers were deeper, and the waterways were much easier to navigate than they are now because the crust has rebounded. And so there's no reason why they couldn't have sailed in all the way to Lake Superior, picked up the copper, and then sailed back. During the Bronze Age, they probably stopped in the British Isles, where you have some of the largest tin deposits in the world, and boom, you've got bronze.
Isn't it interesting how we have this kind of empiric view that the ancient man couldn't have done these things without modern technology? What are your thoughts on that?
BS. It's total BS. My God, they knew how to navigate with the stars. I mean, the Christian cross, the Christian style cross, is a navigation tool, and there have been different generations and modifications of that particular device for measuring distances, for measuring angles, for measuring depths, and all I can tell you is that a lot of the details, I don't think we fully understand how they did it, but they knew how to do it. And I think that if we sit here arrogantly and try to say that these people were somehow not capable, I think that's just dumb. It's just, experience has been, whenever you try to tell somebody that they can't do something, they're going to prove you wrong, just about every time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the past, how many civilizations or how much technology has just, like you said, been buried through the rise of sea level, and what kind of technologies that those civilizations had. But Scott, are you working on any new projects that you want to tell us about?
Well, I kind of alluded to one of the projects. We're talking with some people right now about doing something, and I don't want to get too out in front of ourselves too much, because a deal isn't a deal until you sign on the bottom line and you start filming. And the one thing I've learned is that the television business is changing rapidly, especially cable television. I mean, we were going into our 4th season, riding high, #1 show. Our last 2 episodes were the 2 highest rated episodes by a lot, and it couldn't have been going better. And then they sell the channel. Why? Because they were struggling financially. And they're not the only ones. I mean, it is tough right now because people are getting their content different ways. They're streaming, they're going to Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and all these other, and some of the standard networks are starting to get into series programming, and who knows where it's going to go. So it's really a dynamic time. There's a lot of changes that are happening. But the one thing that is constant is people are interested in good content, and they want to watch shows, they want to learn and be entertained, and so there's a lot of opportunities. It's just going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and I'd really like to get your take on, consumable media. And of course, we moved from radio to the podcast and internet outlets back in 2016, and we get a lot better statistics on the type of downloads, type of demographics, etc. And the other thing that's been really interesting is that although we had some feedback that, they missed us on the radio, but the listeners love it because they can binge watch episodes on demand. And so I guess it's, that anywhere, anytime, on time, any device, any media world. And I know it's a little of a tangent, but I just thought I'd share that with you.
Sure. No, but you know what? It's not a tangent. I think it's important to recognize it and not be in denial that things are changing. I mean, one of the discussions I've had with people is, I'm getting to be, an older guy, and people say, well, what do you think about the young people coming up? Do you ever find yourself thinking like your parents and grandparents did? Well, things were always better in my day, And I have to say, well, I can understand why my parents may have said that, but I have to say that I think the young people coming up today are just as smart as we were, if not smarter. They're certainly savvier with technology. And, I look at some of my nephew is absolutely brilliant, and I think the future bodes well. I really do. And I'll do whatever makes sense, but if people think that I think I have all the answers, I sure don't. And I really think the future does look bright, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, the old days of waiting until Saturday night at 8 o'clock to watch whatever show once a week, kids don't want that. They want to watch it now, and they want to, watch 2, 3, 4 episodes in a row and binge watch. Why shouldn't they be able to do that? Why can't I do that? It's the wave of the future. Like you said, the old way of watching television is quickly changing.
Yeah, the world's definitely controlled more by, Gen X, Gen Y, the millennials, instant gratification, instant feedback required. And so it definitely changes, how we think about production, both audio and video. And, we do have plans next year to produce some video episodes. And so if we get out to Minnesota, I'd certainly love to look you up and talk to you about some of your experience.
Oh, sure. Well, give me a call. I'm always up for anything. And, as long as it's done well and reasonable, and you have to have fun while you're doing these things too. I mean, life's too short to take yourself too seriously, but there's the time, to really do your job, do it well. And, I'm open to, if there's something that's compelling and interesting that's worth taking a look at. I don't care what it is. I'm always willing to learn. I try to be open-minded, like I said, I want people to be open about my stuff. I should absolutely do the same, and I will. So if you're ever out here, we'd love to have you. We'll show you around. Who knows? There's funny woods out here, I'll tell you that.
Well, Scott, this has been a fantastic hour for Paul and I. We're, of course, huge fans of your show. And, for the listeners, if you haven't seen it, again, it's America Unearthed. You can find it on History Channel and H2. And Scott, really appreciate you coming on the show tonight. We really do appreciate you participating in the episode of Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and we thought it was fantastic. So thanks again for coming on Sasquatch Syndicate, and hopefully will soon make you a believer.
Well, I've enjoyed it, guys, and I'll tell you, just because I haven't seen anything to date doesn't mean my mind doesn't remain open. My mind is always open, because until I have conclusive evidence, you really can't have conclusive evidence to prove a negative. So you have to stay open-minded, and if you get something compelling, I'll be more than happy to look at it. And if it's conclusive, I'll change my mind.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being on Sasquatch Syndicate tonight. We really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for having me, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Take care, brother.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
This concludes our August 2017 podcast. Sasquatch Syndicate will return on Friday, September 1st. Thanks to all our listeners and those who have been out to our website and those following us on social media. Sasquatch is a controversial subject, so for all the believers and disbelievers and those that will tell you they have all the answers, just remember we're flying through space at 700 miles per hour. Buckle up.